And now, please welcome to the stage, co-chair of JP Morgan Chase Gender Expansive Council and Out and Equal board member, Chris Messiah.
Hello, hello. Thank you all. It is such a pleasure to be here. As an Out and Equal board member, as a leader at JP Morgan, as a proud parent, a veteran, an African American, and a non-binary person, I stand here in pride. Queer leadership spaces like this is where I was completely transformed, both personally and professionally. Who I am, all of me, is a leader that I know any company would be lucky to have. Thank you. You know, I may not get the message everywhere, but I get it here at Out and Equal, and I bring that light with me everywhere I go. I want each of you to feel that love here this week. So I now want to introduce you to someone who is full of love for this movement. Dina Fadaz, Out and Equal's Managing Director and Head of Programs. Dina has spent nearly 2 decades advocating for all of us, leading HRC's Corporate Equality Index for years, where she also founded HRC's first global index programs in Latin America and Asia. Under her leadership, the number of Fortune 500 companies with full LGBTQ protections rose from less than half to a full majority, over 90%. Dina led the transformation of healthcare coverage for trans and non-binary coworkers across corporate America, and she remains passionate about centering trans and non-binary inclusion. Under her leadership, today, Out and Equal is publishing the first in a series of thought pieces with our Trans and Non-Binary Executive Leadership Circle, of which I am a proud member. Dina was behind some of the LGBTQ movement's largest corporate public policy mobilization efforts, including turning the tide for corporate America's support for marriage equality and the Equality Act. At Out and Equal, she steered the corporate partnerships through COVID, standing up new models of innovation programs from advisory services to reimagining summit content, our global work, and much, much more. If you're friends with Dina on social media, you've probably noticed she runs about every day and posts all of the treasures that she finds along the way, whether she's in Texas or Tokyo. This is Dina. She's always moving forward, pausing sometimes for some joy and fun along the way. And this week is her 5-year anniversary with this organization. And we're all grateful for her leadership and, more importantly, her friendship. I know I am. So what I'd like you to do is please join me in welcoming my dear friend, Dina Fadaz.
This is a lot of fun. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much, Chris. Good morning. Welcome to our Leadership Forum. With a show of hands or a call out, who is here for the first time? Very nice. Second time? What about our legacy leaders? Make a little noise. It's okay. It's early. Let's make some noise. Legacy leaders? Well, welcome to each of you. Now, for the most important question, do we have any Golden Girls fans here? Well, if Sophia were here, she'd say, picture it, San Francisco, 2007. In a hotel meeting room, a fraction of this size, Out and Equal put the call out. Where are all the LGBTQ executives? A few dozen folding chairs later, the executive forum was born. The Who Are We, Where Are We call for Out Execs became an annual leadership conference. Since then, thousands have joined Out and Equal in this journey. Expo became the place where executives who happen to be LGBTQ were transformed into bold LGBTQ+ leaders and change makers. That is the essence of why this annual gathering endures. It's also why we reimagined it for this year and for the future. Because our queer change work isn't relegated to corner offices and ivory towers. Here's what's so unique and powerful about the movement to make workplaces LGBTQ inclusive. When Out and Equal and the HRC's Corporate Equality Index and NGLCC were all standing up in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was no blueprint for success. When companies talked about diversity and inclusion initiatives, they were mainly focused on legal compliance, on race and gender. 25 years ago, there was no legal compliance case for LGBTQ inclusion because there were no employment protections. In fact, not a single federal law protected our community, not even from hate crimes. Gay men were still getting arrested for consensual relations. The AIDS epidemic continued to ravage our community. More states had laws on the books restricting our rights than permitting equal treatment under the law. Just a few Fortune 500 companies had protections for the LGBTQ community, and there were very few out senior leaders. So it was in this grim environment that we forged a new path, the business case for LGBTQ inclusion. And that case was built by change makers like all of us in this room. 3 decades ago at P&G, an earnest woman in her early 20s, a straight ally, took her first corporate job out of Peace Corps. As a marketing associate, she noticed one of their healthcare products was bringing relief to an ignored population, gay men living with HIV. How can we as a company serve our customers if our values and our policies don't reflect them, she and others asked. And with the rallying of other leaders, this became a history-making moment for the company when they added sexual orientation protections decades before many other Fortune companies. A little later at JP Chase, a young, out gay man just starting his career was among the early ERG leads. In his words, "I knew I needed to push for domestic partner benefits years before I would even have a partner." At Merck, a brave woman in the early 2000s educated her colleagues on her experience transitioning, helping to build gender transition guidelines and advocate for equitable healthcare benefits. None of these folks had DEI in their job title. None of these brave, bold individuals were executives. All of these individuals were leaders with enduring impact. This is why we have evolved this forum in name and content to the Leadership Forum. We recognize that leadership is embodied across all levels of organizations. And perhaps more than any other movement for change, this 3-decade project to transform workplaces has been driven by scrappy but strategic, sometimes scared but brave, committed, queer, and ally professionals. Just about all of us have identities that put us on the margins. The experience of being marginalized can be demoralizing, it can be angering, it can also be motivating and illuminating. The view from the margins is actually the widest lens. Think about it. When you don't occupy the center, what do you get to observe? All the possible fault lines, the spaces and solutions unseen by those taking up the most space. This is one of the superpowers of queer and ally leadership. Because we move through this world as survivors, we bring to our leadership so many powerful and unique qualities. Our resilience when faced with the blunt force of adversity, from lawmakers insistent on trying to write us out of existence. Our empathy extended even to those who have hurt us. Our creativity to problem solve and innovate when the chips are down, and our joy, the inner light that outshines discrimination and shame in who we are. The joy in the drag queen's swagger down the runway, the joy in the dance on a pride float, the joy in staying true to ourselves. Last night, Aaron talked a bit about isolation. Isolation is not just being alone. It's being present in the group, but having whole parts of you denied or treated with apathy. Belonging is the antidote to isolation. Belonging is that ideal state of being made to feel so comfortable in your own skin, in all of your identities and life experience, so comfortable and so welcome, you forget it's unique to be able to show up at work like that. You get to take for granted that you're trans, that you're pan, that you're bi, that you're gay, that you're the proud parent of a queer kid. We on the margins cannot simply insist we belong. We have to engage our workplaces, our allies, and yes, even those who don't understand or like us. We have to make workplaces structurally sound in their inclusive policies and benefits. We have to name the differences that are held against us, from blatant discrimination to subtle unconscious slights and biases. DEI is an explicit response to implicit bias. DEI is not the divide for division's sake caricature that we're seeing in the news. That just isn't smart for anyone. It's not why hundreds of leading companies have invested so much in diversity, equity, and inclusion. The identities we surface, those that feel the most prominent in a given space, are typically those parts of who we are that are actively excluded. DEI is not the end game. It's a strategic framework to get to belonging. It's not that LGBTQ people insist on bringing our sexuality or gender identity to the workplace. It's that the workplace demands a level of sharing of all of us. And we're at our strongest when we know we belong. When we know who we are is an asset of value to our companies and organizations. The Leadership Forum is a space to unburden yourself from feeling isolated, to exchange ideas with peers and people you might not think you have much in common with. But I guarantee you, by the end of this week, you will feel deeply connected. It's a space to name the challenges we are facing and generate effective solutions. So allow yourself to be inspired, ensure you meet and deepen connections with those who are different from you, and most importantly, as Erin said last night, take with you the baton of change work we are all entrusted with. Those of us in rooms like this, we're the lucky ones. The only way this week will be made real and valuable is if we all hold ourselves accountable for what happens after we leave. How we hold ourselves strong and firm in the notion that we have to be the leadership for our times. History isn't something you look back at and say it was inevitable. It happens because people make decisions that are sometimes very impulsive and of the moment. But those moments are cumulative realities. Marsha P. Johnson, the Black queer godmother of pride, said that. Justice, equity, inclusion, and belonging, these are not inevitable. Getting there takes all of us, in our most spontaneous moments of resilience to our most thoughtfully constructed plans. How will you build out our shared cumulative realities? How will you leave your workplace and your communities stronger than you found them? Welcome to the new Leadership Forum. Welcome to your journey, and welcome to being the leaders we all need more than ever. Thank you all. And who better to embody today's generation of transformative LGBTQ+ leaders than our next speaker? From her teenage years in political activism to making headlines as the first openly trans student president at American University, my alma mater. Any other AU Eagles here? Couple, I see some hands, all right. She has dedicated her life to uplifting community. She led the advocacy effort to protect all people from gender identity and gender expression-based discrimination in her beloved home state of Delaware. As a woman of many firsts, she is also the first openly transgender woman to work in the White House, rising from intern to a staff role, the first openly transgender speaker at a national political convention, and is recognized as the first openly trans state senator in American history. Through these firsts, she has fought for equality for all. Please welcome to the stage my friend, my former colleague, and my inspiration for what is possible, Delaware State Senator Sarah McBride.
Well, thank you so much, Dina. And in the immortal words of the Golden Girls theme song, thank you for being my friend. Good morning, Out and Equal. All right, come on, a little bit more. Good morning, Out and Equal. That's better. It is so, so great to be here today. As I stand on this stage, I'm looking out at so many familiar faces, and I am filled with gratitude. Gratitude to be in a space like this, to be in community with you all, to look out on a room full of LGBTQ people and allies who serve as leaders throughout our economy and throughout our country. And as I join you today, I want to start by saying thank you. For decades, people in this room and those who came before us have been on the front lines of change. You have forged trails that have allowed others to flourish. You've opened hearts and changed minds. You've grown our ranks of allies. You've proven that we can live and lead openly all at the same time. And personally, you've not only made it possible for someone like me to serve in public office, but it's organizations like Out and Equal that have helped solve the crisis of hope that I faced as a young person. When I feared, like many of you, that my dreams and my identity were mutually exclusive. When I worried that the heart of this country was simply not big enough to love someone like me. In that crisis of hope, people in this room provided kernels of hope for me. People like Amanda Simpson, who I remember when I was buried deep in the closet in high school, watching become the first transgender woman to be appointed by the President of the United States to any position in our federal government. And it's because of people like Amanda that I get to stand before you this morning as both an out queer transgender woman and as a state senator serving the state I was born and raised in. Growing up, that sentence would have seemed so impossible to me that it was almost incomprehensible. And that's the beauty of this room. That's the power of this space. We are literally living impossibility. And right now, I don't take that progress for granted. Because at this moment, across our country, anti-equality politicians are attempting to undo our progress. They're trying to rip our hope away from us. They are engaging in a mean and malicious effort to bully some of the most vulnerable but amazing members of our community, transgender young people. They're trying to rip trans kids away from parents and providers, coaches and classmates, teammates and teachers, friends and family members, stripping away any layer of support that these trans kids may have, leaving them isolated, telling these kids that they are unworthy of love and support, that they don't belong in our country. But they do belong. We belong, and we belong everywhere. That presence, the power of our proximity, it is the superpower of our movement. In living our lives openly and authentically, we are organic agents of change. We see how our presence in workplaces improves company policies. We see how a child coming out can transform a family's love. And we see that when we have a seat at the table in government, policies and priorities change. It's easy to score points on the backs of a community when you don't have to look them in the eye, when you don't have to answer their questions, when you don't have to deal with their votes. It's easy to deprioritize our needs when we aren't nearby. At a minimum, our presence makes the job of anti-equality forces that much harder and more uncomfortable. And we serve as an undeniable and unavoidable reminder of the humanity of our community. But even more importantly, through our presence and our perseverance, we maintain the bonds that over time, admittedly all too slowly, can open the most closed of hearts and minds. Last year, I had a deeply moving experience on the floor of the Delaware State Senate. It was the final week of our legislative session. Just 2 days earlier, I had made an electoral announcement that for federal tax purposes I can't explicitly state right now in this space, but it had to do with finally sending a trans person to that big domed building down the street. And that was an announcement that unsurprisingly got a lot of attention. It was an announcement that was also met with what is all too common when an LGBTQ person strives to do something that has never been done before. I faced hate, vitriol, and the risk of violence. And because of that risk, our state capitol had to increase security, a fact that both my Democratic and Republican colleagues were aware of. And so coincidentally, 2 days after that announcement, with increased security visible, I brought forward legislation that I was sponsoring to ban the LGBTQ panic defense in Delaware, a legal defense that many of you are aware of that essentially claims that anti-LGBTQ violence is excusable. The bill had passed the state house on fairly partisan lines a few weeks before. I presented the bill to the Senate, gave my opening remarks, and prepared to do what all of us in this room have gotten far too used to doing: defend my dignity and our humanity. I finished my remarks, I paused, I waited for my conservative colleagues to stand up and oppose the bill, to say at the very best that this was a solution in search of a problem, or at worst to allude to reasons why violence might be understandable, if not justified. It's what we've heard in other legislative bodies. And so I braced myself as my colleagues stood up to speak. But then something amazing happened. Each one stood up with that increased security visible in that space. They looked me directly in the eyes, and with tears swelling in their eyes, they validated the pain and the fear that many LGBTQ people live with. They affirmed the dignity of LGBTQ lives. And to a person, they not only declared that they would be voting for the bill, but led by the most conservative member of that caucus. For the first time in any legislative body in the United States, every single Republican stood up and asked to be added as co-sponsors to that bill. And look, I know that's a low bar. I know that making clear that there is no excuse for violence is quite literally the bare minimum. But what happened in that moment was more profound than the single policy before us. Because what happened in that moment, due to the swell of circumstances, due to the power of our proximity, was that these politicians began to understand that the political is fundamentally personal. That this wasn't an abstract issue, but something that impacted someone they knew, and yes, someone that they cared about. And while that moment of breakthrough won't change their minds on every issue of LGBTQ equality overnight, while they won't be leading the Pride Parade tomorrow, you can't undo that synaptic connection once it happens. And it's in moments like these, often so small to be almost invisible, that so much of our progress has been built. It's how public opinion has progressed. It's how previously cautious industries have become increasingly unwavering allies. And in this critical hour, the greatest threat to our movement is not that we underestimate the fight ahead of us. The biggest risk in this moment is that we fail to summon the hope necessary to see it through. Right now, it's considered in vogue to be cynical. It's considered naive to be hopeful. And I get it. It can be easy to feel hopeless. Despite how far we've come as a community and as a country, this moment feels different than 10 or 15 years ago, when it felt like if we simply worked for it, change was inevitable. That if we simply volunteered and voted and told our stories, that we could bend the arc of the moral universe inalterably toward justice. It's hard to feel now that if we do what we need to do, everything will work out. And for the first time in a long time, we can't quite see the light at the end of the tunnel. But the truth is, that sense of inevitability that we felt 10 or 15 years ago, that is the exception in our nation's history. Every previous generation of Americans has been called to conquer seemingly insurmountable odds even greater than the ones we face today. Enslaved people in the 1850s who had no reason to believe that an Emancipation Proclamation was on the horizon. Children risking life and limb in factories in the 1890s who had every reason to think that things would never get better. Unemployed workers standing in bread lines during the early days of the Great Depression who had never heard of a New Deal. Civil rights marchers facing brutality as they set off from Selma who didn't know whether their efforts and their bravery would result in the Voting Rights Act. Patrons at the Stonewall Inn who fought back against government oppression and never knew of an America where they could live openly and authentically without violating the law. All of those Americans, every single one of those generations, had every reason to fear that change would never come. They couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel, but they persevered. They summoned their hope, they found the light, and they changed the world. And if they have done it before, then I know we can do it again. Because so long as we exist, we educate. So long as we are present, we progress. And so long as we breathe, we hope. Which is why standing here today, I am as confident as ever that we have what it takes to ensure that the story of this moment, the story of this time, is not the story of bigotry and backlash, but of pride and of progress. That it will be the story of all of us coming out, conquering our crisis of hope, finding that light, and building a world where LGBTQ young people, including trans kids, can grow up and know that they belong. They belong in our communities, they belong in our schools, they belong in our workplaces, and yes, they even belong in the halls of Congress. Thank you all very much. It's an honor to be with you today, and it's a privilege to be with you in this fight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator McBride. Amazing, amazing. How amazing? Morning plenary, pretty good start? Yeah? So this is just the start, obviously, of what will be an incredible day of programming. But before we leave the ballroom for the workshops, I'm here to relay all the housekeeping that you were worried about. So here we go. A few updates to help you guide you along your day. So it's time to break off to your tracks that you selected during your registration process. So your track is listed on your badge, the very bottom, and you're in the same room for all of the learning sessions. It's a curated program. It's been selected exactly for your particular cohort. And you can only attend your own track, so no room hopping. All right. So be sure to check the event app as well. Hopefully you've all downloaded. It's on your smartphone. It has your personalized track schedule, maps of the rooms, and any session materials that you'll need. Now remember, it's important to wear your badge at all times during the event. Security and staff members will be monitoring this closely as you enter and exit each of your rooms. Those without badges obviously cannot be permitted entry into any of the event spaces. So we have a fantastic lineup for you. We're excited to work with you, and my colleagues are stationed in the hallways to assist if you have any questions, or the restrooms are right across, there's food, whatever you need. So enjoy your sessions. We'll see you back here for the lunch plenary and our incredible afternoon of plenary speakers. And that's why we put this completely new concept together for this year's completely new Leadership Forum. So we've gathered what we've been calling the big ideas to share with you, a collection of perspectives to give life to conversations we've been having and set new ideas in motion. So We will help you as best we can. We are here for any questions you may have. You have probably about a half hour, if I'm honest. You'll have about a half hour between now. Doors open to your track sessions at 10 a.m. and we will start immediately, right at 10:15. We've got a great morning plan for you, and we'll see you back here at lunch. Enjoy.